to the International Monetary Fund, which last week released its 2021 Article 4 consultation staff report on Nigeria. That report provided a guide on the state of Africa's largest economy while weighing the risks and outlining recommendations and forecasts. Joining me for a two-part exclusive insight into the latest report is Aisen. He is the IMF country representative for Nigeria. Aisen is live tonight to me here in Lagos from our Abuja studios. A warm welcome to you, sir, and thanks for coming through on the show tonight.
Thank you very much for having me. It's an honor and a pleasure to be with you today.
I really appreciate that. Hope your new year is getting off to a very good start. Let's start by taking an outlook on Nigeria. I know there are a whole lot of issues in the Article 4 staff report, but give me a summary of this and what is your outlook from the IMF side for Nigeria?
Yes, as we say in the Article 4 consultation, the growth outlook has improved since last year, 2020, the previous Article 4. So the economy is rebounding. And in fact, in the report, our forecast for growth was 2.6%, but we have actually raised that growth projection to 3%. So clearly, the economy is on demand. More sectors are participating on the growth of the economy, of GDP. And we certainly saw strong performance in the last quarter also of manufacturing, for example. So there is an expansion of the sectors. Having said that, what we observed in growth last year was to some extent dependent on favorable base effects, meaning that in the previous year, in 2020, because of the lockdown and because of the pandemic, there were some contractions in some quarters. So part of the rebound is explained by a simple statistical feature of this recovery. But all in all, I think the story is a positive story in the sense that the pandemic is now turning into hopefully a more mild part of it, and the authorities manage very, very well. There was a very important task force that really did a good job in terms of ensuring that fatalities and the transmission in Nigeria were contained, and this has provided some confidence for economic activity to rebound. So on that, we are actually quite well impressed by the policies of the Nigerian government. Going forward, however, to have those strong economic performance that we observe in Q2 and Q3, 4 or 5% year-on-year growth rates, reforms are going to be needed. We are forecasting growth at about 2.6, 2.7% next year, in the year 2022, and the following years, in the absence of important reforms that we think should be taken, and they were discussed also during these Article 4 consultations.
But are there significant changes in terms of the economic fundamentals and your outlook on the country? What more fundamental policy structural reforms are you looking forward to, robustly speaking, broadly speaking, that Nigeria needs to leverage beyond 2.6%, which is below population growth, to move to the region of 5, 6, 7 GDP growth, for example? Ari.
Yes, thank you. In fact, Nigeria needs much higher growth rates to have an impact on indicators. But it's not enough only to have high growth rates, because the history of Nigeria, there were moments where Nigeria presented very high growth rates. So it's very important that this is broadened, that the growth that Nigeria has is not concentrated in one particular sector like the oil sector. So part of the good news that we observe in 2021 is the broadening of growth. And in fact, non-oil sectors grew much more than oil sector. Of course, oil sector growth is also going to be important, and always, but the importance of growth being inclusive and reaching out to all Nigerians And together with it, greater employment opportunities are essential for growth to be sustainable over a longer period of time. So part of our messages are related to what are the appropriate policies that will allow for a broadening of growth, not only that growth is higher, but broaden to a variety of sectors. And for that, major reforms in various areas would be called for. And the current model has shown, in our view, some exhaustion in allowing growth rates to be much higher. There has been quite a bit of an emphasis on controls, administrative measures, being by the central bank, being by customs. So the general model is of controls and restrictions, and that puts some difficulties for the private sector. For example, access to foreign exchange, for example, being able to import important inputs for their production. That constrains a little bit the ability of the private sector to really push forward and be the main engine of growth. It's worth noting that the potential of Nigeria is huge, and it's well demonstrated in particular sectors. For example, ICT, it's been growing for many, many years in double digits, and it just shows the talent of the country that must be enhanced and supported. So a conducive environment needs to be created, and policies so that the private sector really can push forward and continue to contribute, and even more than it's been contributing. On the other hand, and in parallel to that, fiscal policy. There is very little fiscal space at the moment for the government to be able to support human capital, education, health, and also infrastructure for the private sector to thrive. So I think it's very important to be able to have more fiscal space, mobilize more revenues. So part of our messages were related to mobilizing more revenues, finding fiscal space, ensuring that spending is appropriate. There are many spending pressures, including the elections, security, and also with the fuel subsidies. So it's very important in our view to have a balanced fiscal policy.
Thanks, Ari. Let's chat to this very vexed discourse about Nigeria's debt sustainability, risks, repayment capabilities, balancing, and the country's needed funding development. Let's raise that conversation just before we go on this break.
Yes, I've seen many commentaries on this, and I think it's important to recognize that Nigeria has a very low debt to GDP ratio still, so it's a very solvent country, and there is no, and we in the report talk about capacity to repay the IMF. There is no doubt that Nigeria has conditions and has the track record of being a strong sovereign that repays and pays its creditors on time. So I think I want to allay those concerns to start off. But as the IMF team has conveyed, and it's the obligation of the IMF team, the trends are of certain concern, and it's not only concern to us, it's concern also of the government. So of course they understand those concerns. When you observe the debt to GDP ratio, because of the high deficits, the large deficits, increasing year after year, it's natural to say that those deficits need to be tamed, and they need to be consolidating at some point going forward. And I think it's natural to say those things. Okay. And it's important to make sure that now our current projection, debt to GDP ratio is about 36%. It's going to go to 43% in the medium term in 3-4 years. Okay, so then the ratio becomes a little high.
Ari, yes. Permit me, we have more on the table to discuss. Hold that thought very there. We'll be back. Ari Aisen, IMF country rep in Nigeria. We'll continue that conversation right on the debt sustainability. Everyone stand by. Okay, I'm taking this exclusive conversation further with Aisen, the IMF country representative for Nigeria, here on Arise Exchange, live to us from Abuja studios tonight, this exclusive interview. Thank you so much, Ari. I'm just going to allow you to continue that conversation around, yes, Nigeria's debt to GDP ratio has been talked about by government officials, but about the sustainability of the debt itself, Nigeria's ability to repay and have what is left for development financing. That's the conversation.
Yes, so the issue of capacity to repay, as I was saying, is not really an issue. The track record is very strong, both in terms of private obligations, and we actually saw at the end of last year that the Eurobond issuance was oversubscribed. It was a success. So I want to allay those concerns and put it to rest. But I think it's important to recognize that because the fiscal deficits have been high, they need to be financed. And the trend of the debt to GDP ratio increasing, we're projecting 36%, and it may go up to 43%. Still not an alarming level, but very still large, already large. So it's not, we don't know what level of debt to GDP ratio becomes overly concerned. So it's our job as an institution to highlight that eventually that may become too large to bear. And reminding also that debt dynamics are very important. Nigeria has been enjoying low interest rates and worldwide. And around the world, because of inflationary concerns, interest rates are starting to climb. So dynamics can reverse on that. And eventually you are caught in a difficult position. I think many people talk about the issue of liquidity and the ability to service those debts, the stock of debt. So the stock of debt is not very large for the size of this economy. We just talked about it. The ability to service, this is a bit constrained, but not so much because of the stock of debt or even the cost, current cost of debt, but it's because of the amount of taxes that Nigeria at the moment collects. So it's again a reflection that you need more fiscal space to actually be able to pay your debt service, pay your salaries, but also do very other important spending on security, on education, health, and therefore contribute to the growth process and the inclusivity that all Nigerians would like to see, and the government is committed. So in that sense, we would like to be very, very welcoming and supportive of the Ministry of Finance plan of raising the tax to GDP, revenue to GDP ratio to 15% by 2025. It's currently at 7-8%, so we have another 7 percentage points of GDP for tax revenue to GDP ratio, for revenue as a share of GDP to grow in the next 3-4 years. That's an ambitious target to have, but it's important to have this target, and it's important to work together, and we at the IMF are committed to support the authorities to strengthen tax administration, broadening the base, improving compliance on the various taxes, VAT and others, including excises that need to increase. So these are all very important policies that the Ministry of Finance is trying to put in place.
What about the IMF's position on Nigeria's commitment to this $3.4 billion rapid refinancing instrument, which was disbursed in April of 2020, just as the pandemic was rearing its very ugly head?
Right. So the commitments are well known and signed by the government of Nigeria in its letter of intent to the IMF. And those commitments, the performance has been mixed. In some cases, there has been quite a bit of progress, but in other cases, there is more work to be done and needs to be built. So let me give you an example, which is one that is very important to the institution and to the country as a whole, and in fact to all the countries that received emergency assistance from the IMF because of the pandemic. One is the issue of governance and transparency. So the Ministry of Finance, in the beginning, after having received the support of the IMF, had created budget lines that allowed tracking of spending that was committed to COVID-19. This was a very welcoming and positive move by all stakeholders to support transparency and being more clear about what is being done with those funds that were put in place. But unfortunately, there has been technical difficulties in terms of access and even the quality at some points of those public information that needs to continue to be improved because it's been a bit uneven. Not everyone and all the time can have access to that information. So we are calling for the authorities to really be mindful and finish the job that already started. And probably the most difficult part has already been done, which is creating those lines. It's in the budget, and it's not only the federal budget, there are even state budget information available that should be available for everyone at all times. So this is just one example of how to boost and enhance these important commitments that at the end of the day will be to the benefit of Nigeria and Nigerians, so that everyone can see the positive spending and the positive contributions that the Nigerian government is being given and the attention given to this important spending against the COVID.
Ari, we spent quite some time talking about the fiscal space. Let's switch gear and talk a bit more about exchange rate and management and Naira-dollar relationship and all of that, and what should be the appropriate Naira-dollar rate in the market and all of that. What are the broad recommendations for Nigeria from the IMF in terms of the monetary policy side of things?
Yes, so in terms of the exchange rate, our recommendations have been quite consistent over the years, in fact. And also the central bank has done movements in the right direction last year. For example, by eliminating one of the windows that used to be even in the website, the official exchange rate. So most of the transactions could be within what it's called today the NAFEX rate. Of course, there is more work that needs to be done to be built on that good policy development by eliminating other windows that still exist. That hopefully can be done, and it's more transparent, and it helps the clarity of exchange rate policy to have a peg, a fixed exchange rate that everyone can know for sure that the rate is the NAFEX rate and the transactions are happening within that rate as the main rate. So unifying all the rates around that is still work in progress, but a lot has been done already. More should be done to conclude that. The second part of the exchange rate policy is to allow more adjustment of the exchange rate. It doesn't mean that you need to change the regime to a floating regime, but together with other policies, and this is very important, you can adjust the peg to higher levels if you think that the rate is not clearing demand and supply of foreign exchange. And because of the ongoing scarcity that we are aware that the private sector is not able to access foreign exchange at the NAFEX rate, it's important to make sure that you have a reasonably flexible system that allows for periodic adjustments of the peg so that the rate can clear the market. Now, that cannot be done by itself and in isolation. It needs to be supported by other policies and by appropriate context, because monetary policy should be probably more tight, and if you do that, fiscal policy should be more adequate and deficits a little lower or much lower. So, and the political environment, everything needs to be conducive to support a move like that. Otherwise, it will be previous experiences in Nigeria, that suddenly you keep the peg as is, but eventually there will be a time when the reserves were going to be under pressure, hopefully never, but it happened in the past, and then you are forced to adjust the peg. And that creates even more volatility to the foreign exchange market than if you were able to plan ahead and do periodic adjustments together with other conducive policies. So this is our view, and we communicate this in the staff report quite clearly, and as a suggestion to allow the Nigerian economy to absorb shocks a little better.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your time, and do have a great evening, Sir Ari Aisen, IMF country representative for Nigeria. Thank you so much for this exclusive interview on Arise News.